All right. Well, good morning, AP Gov. It is Tuesday, April 21st. Reason for today, point of today is we're going to be looking at some review notes for chapters 5, which is the presidency, and chapter 7, the bureaucracy. We're merging those two together because they kind of nicely blend. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Shoot me an email. We're going to get through this as we go. I'll start sharing my screen. We'll go to here. And click present. All right, so the executive branch. So chapters 5 and 7, the focus for this week, last week was Congress, this week becomes the executive branch. So as we go here, sorry, let me click this out here. When there's an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president, this comes from one of Trump's press conferences, a quote from him on July 23rd of 2019. So obviously, everything that we talk about with the presidency, the powers of the president, the roles of the president, everything comes from Article 2. If you get a question that asks you about the presidency or the powers of the presidency, your response should be Article 2. Okay, so we look at the power the president has over things like foreign affairs or relationships with other countries or other governments, and then domestic affairs, everything that occurs within the borders of the United States. So the first of that is one of the powers that written into Article 2. Power as a chief diplomat becomes writing treaties. So actually writing agreements, treaties, legislation with other foreign governments. The second piece would be forming executive agreements. So some of those executive agreements can deal with things like immigration, it can deal with trade. The executive agreements do not need any sort of oversight coming from any of the other branches. Also is power of serving as commander-in-chief. He's the highest ranking military member. He is saluted by any and all other people in the military, so he is commander-in-chief. Some of the powers of the domestic that he has domestically or within the United States, one of those only things specifically written into Article 2 is he has to give a State of the Union address. You have to address a joint session of Congress at least once a year. That's typically done in January. Okay, he can address the country. I mean, he's been doing press conferences here pretty regularly. Right before break, that was it March 12th, he went on television from the Oval Office addressing the country. That's where that term, the bully pulpit, comes in. The pulpit, remember we talked when we were back in class, kind of the lectern, the place where religious leaders give their sermons, their homilies, their addresses, that pulpit. Well, in this term, the bully pulpit means the president using his power as leader of the country to shift or try to convey a change of opinion. He can also propose the budget. So the president does propose budgets, what he wants to fund, what he wants to cut. But again, the power, we'll get to where the power of budget actually lies with Congress in the next slide. He can also provide signing statements. I'm signing this bill into law, but here's how I see it being implemented. Here's how I see it being carried out. And he's also the one that runs the bureaucracy. So that's kind of how we've seen this already, where why we're joining chapters 5 and 7 with the bureaucracy, all of your alphabet soup organizations. Let me close my door. He also can enact executive orders. So remember, executive agreements, the same as treaties, executive orders, the same as law, neither need congressional approval. And then he also has the right to claim executive privilege. We saw that with Nixon, we've seen that with Trump, where sometimes what the president does, in the power of him being the president, he needs a little bit more of a wider berth or more leniency in conducting the business of the executive branch. So this is where the war powers resolution comes up. So not a bad idea to go back to this. A lot of things can be hit on the war powers resolution. Remember, written and passed in the wake of the Vietnam War, Congress was like, hey, listen, maybe we don't want the president sending us off to unrestricted, unlimited timeframes of military combat, regardless of whether there's a formal declaration of war given. So the War Power Resolution aimed to limit the power of the commander-in-chief, limit the power of the president when Congress has not formally declared war. Remember, that's up to 60 days with an additional 30 days to withdraw. Has to let Congress know, so keep that in mind. That's again one of those things that really fits nicely into the powers of the executive and the powers of Congress. So we look at that. Remember what I told you guys last week. If you were, first priority, get those documents into your brains. Second thing, kind of look at these checks and balances. I mean, there's a lot of things. Like if they are cutting 2/5 of the curriculum out of the test, that really leaves a big chunk when it comes to interaction of the branches. And interaction of the branches is solely those checks and balances, or separation of powers, but not the same thing. So the president can veto legislation coming out of Congress. Okay, Congress, as a check they have on the branches, impeachment. We saw that this past year. Articles of impeachment written by a majority vote in the House, but in order to remove from office, you need that 2/3 vote in the Senate. The president, when it comes to the judicial branch, president can grant pardons. Okay, I know old Joe Exotic and then the Tiger King is reaching out, really thinking that President Trump and all of this is going to grant him a pardon. I don't believe that that's going to happen, but pardons have been granted. President Trump has granted pardons over the past 3.5 years, basically exonerating and removing charges for people held in federal courts. So the president can grant a pardon, but then you also have the Supreme Court and the federal court action of judicial review, that the actions of Congress and the president can fall under the jurisdiction of the courts if they find it to be unconstitutional. So we've seen that with the Muslim ban at the very beginning of the Trump presidency. You saw federal courts issuing injunctions at that point. This would be a great slide to expand upon. This is not the bare minimum. This is not, oh, Fleet says this is all we need to know. This is just to kind of get your brains thinking about those checks and balances, the ones that the president has over Congress, Congress has over the president, Congress or president has over the courts, and vice versa. Okay, so again, the veto, what are the limits on veto power? Congress can override that veto with a 2/3 vote. Okay, for quite some time, there has not been a veto-proof majority in Congress. So again, a veto is very powerful. It's hard to get that 2/3 vote. If the president vetoes something, you're going to have to get at least some of the people within the president's own party to vote against it, and that's just not really typical. When we talked about the budget proposal, the president can propose a budget, but that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. Congress has the final authority on voting on that final budget. Okay. The executive order, executive order carries the same weight as law. There's not a ton of limits that we can express formally. I mean, you can see if the executive order violates the Constitution, or you have a federal court issuing an injunction. That could be a possible limit that they have over executive orders. But again, that's time consuming, and you've got to really look for a federal court system that's going to find some justification to deal with it as unconstitutional. So, okay, we talked a lot. You talked last week about Fed 51. Separation of powers is not enough. We need to establish checks and balances as seen in Articles 1, 2, and 3. We talked about Federalist 10, in a large republic, squelching the impact of factions in order to protect minority voices. So now we go back to Fed 70. Oh yeah, Fed 70. Okay, an effective executive requires energy. Okay. And in order to have that, you need unity. So the Fed 70 was an argument as to not have multiple people as president, not to have this large office, that the president needs to be one person to make those calls. It's easier to hold them accountable. It's easier to keep track of what they're doing. So the wise amongst you on this webcast, or the people that are viewing this later, go back to your Fed 70. Okay, go back to Fed 70, find something more than Fed 70 says we need one president. Like, you got to dig in there, get some of those quotes. We've already done the sheets. Make sure that you actually understand what we're talking about here with Fed 70, but if you're getting an argumentative essay on the actual test that has something to do with the executive branch, your go-tos, your fallbacks should really be Fed 70 and Article 2. Okay. So that is the executive branch in the fastest amount of time possible. Now let's just transition quickly into the bureaucracy. Okay, under George Washington, there were 3 departments in the federal bureaucracy encompassing 230 employees. Currently under President Trump, there are over 2 million federal employees across 15 executive departments and 137 independent agencies. So remember what we were talking about right before we left for spring break. Some of those different agencies, we were looking at parts of the Iron Triangle, which we'll get to in a second, but independent agencies, the regulatory commissions, government corporations, your cabinet departments, all of those fall under the umbrella of bureaucracy. And their job is to, okay, Congress passed a law, the president signed it. How do we actually implement it? How do we actually enforce? Whose job is it to make sure that this new law or this new policy is put into place? Well, that's going to fall to a cabinet department or a bureaucratic agency. Keep in mind, we transitioned from a patronage to a merit-based system. Remember before it was like, hey, I'm going to give all my buddies their jobs and we're going to hook them up. Maybe they're not the most qualified. That's going to fall under the patronage system. Friends, relatives, members of the party that were loyal. And they said, hey, maybe we should get people who are smart into those particular agencies. So we switched to merit-based, okay? So there could be, remember they take a test, they can be placed based on the best person for that job. That comes out of things like the Pendleton Act and the Hatch Act. Pendleton Civil Service Act says, hey, you can't just give your buddies this. We're looking at merit-based systems. Quote here is old Rick Perry. He is the Secretary of Energy right now. Some critics argue that the merit system does not go far enough, as the president always has the final say and can choose the cabinet. Okay, he can choose cabinet members. Remember, but those cabinet secretaries do need Senate approval. So yes, he can choose them, and the president does have the final say. If we go back to our crisis simulation, where we talked about, okay, everybody was a cabinet member. For those of us, I think something happened there too, where we didn't get through everybody, but the cabinet members can make a recommendation, but the president ultimately has that final decision. So now we go back to our favorite, everyone's favorite, yours and mine, the Iron Triangle. Okay, critics argue that the real flaws unelected bureaucracies lack accountability to the president and lack accountability to the people. So again, you have your committee, you have your interest group, and you have your bureaucratic agencies. Okay, the fact that these people are not elected really does remove some of the accountability. However, we have to trust the patriotic AP Gov teacher in me says you have to trust that in regards to the hiring within bureaucratic agencies that you are following the merit system, and you do have, whereas the secretary could be picked by the president, all the people that work below them should be being hired based on merit and based on their ability to complete that job successfully. So just a quick schedule update. So tomorrow and Thursday, you should be completing your FRQs. I'll show those to you here in a second. Question 1, 25 minutes. Question 2, 15 minutes. That should mirror the amount of time minus the upload time that you would have on the AP test itself. I'll explain a little bit more here in a second. I'm also doing those class check-ins. In order to save you with a lengthy email or announcement posting, I've just put the Zoom codes on the calendar for your particular class period. So if I denoted that if you found your way here, but all the Zoom codes are going to be on the calendar at the particular time that you need to access those. Again, those are optional. But again, it was good last week to kind of check with people, and we kind of chatted about a few things that came up. So that'll be during your regularly scheduled block period, about the first 15 or 20 minutes. Again, the schedule is on the announcements and it's on the calendar. And then Friday at 2 p.m., we'll go on Zoom here and debrief those FRQs. Okay, any questions here before I move on? Okay, if you do, throw them in the chat. So here are the two FRQs for this week. Considering we do have two FRQs, let's kind of, I would strongly suggest I put this into the Canvas instructions. You should really run this as a mock, okay? Go to where you're going to test on test day. You're going to test in your room on your bed. Is it easy to type that way? Are you going to be able to have all your resources? Is it better to sit at a table somewhere? Do you have Wi-Fi connectivity where you're going to be working? You want to probably set this up in as close to the testing environment as possible. And then keep your eye on that timer. I've given 45 minutes on Canvas to complete this. Because I want to mirror the time frame, but unfortunately, there's not a way for me to only time a particular question. So on the AP test, you have 25 minutes to respond to the first question. Then you have 5 minutes to upload your responses. Then you have 15 minutes for the second question, and then 5 minutes to upload your responses. Because I don't need to mirror the upload time. I would encourage you, set your timer for 25 minutes, set your timer for 15 minutes. The first one is an argumentative essay, as it will be on the test. Blueprint for checks and balances. The Constitution outlines procedure for Congress to impeach and remove public officials, including the president. Develop an argument on whether congressional procedure outlined in the Constitution for impeachment and removal is an effective check on the president, too weak of a check of a check on the president, or too strong. So this case, we've actually given you three options. Again, like I said last week, always look at that last sentence. It's going to tell you what you're going to be arguing. So you're going to say it's effective, it's too strong, or it's too weak. So now we've given you three options. Use at least one piece of evidence from the following documents. We've given you Brutus 1, we've given you Fed 51, and Fed 70. So again, depending on your argument, there are documents here to support those arguments. If you are not using the 3-paragraph model, if you are not using that template, I don't know what you are doing, okay? You should follow the 3-paragraph. In that first paragraph, your thesis could be as simple as just the thesis statement. So thesis statement, evidence 1 paragraph, evidence 2 paragraph. If that's about as simple as it can get. If you are giving me 4 sentences in one chunk of text, I'm probably just not even going to read it. You're just not taking the time, and so I won't probably take that time. You should be following that 3-paragraph model and the template, all of which are posted on Canvas, and we've reviewed multiple times. Go back and view those old videos. Question number 2 is a concept analysis. So, okay, here's one that you're going to get, A, B, and C. This one's about the FCC and net neutrality. Okay, part A, referencing the scenario, describe a function being carried out by the FCC, a bureaucratic agency. Explain how iron triangles can affect this process that you outlined in A. And part C, in December of 17, the FCC created the rule ending net neutrality. Explain how Congress could respond to this decision. So that's A, B, and C. That should take you about 15 minutes. Those are the 2 questions. They are posted on Canvas. You should take that time during your block day, Wednesday and Thursday, to answer. Are there any questions on the prompts themselves before we get into anything else? Okay. Last thing, putting up here on the remote learning page. All of this is mirrored in your in the announcements. So here, guys, if you haven't looked already, please do. Like, I'm spending time putting it together for you. spend some time reviewing it. These are the notes that we just went through today. Here are the textbook notes for chapter 5 and the guided readings. But then again, if you recall, this was some stuff that was covered under Miss Rabinovich. Okay, so we did some reviews then. I put a chapter 5 review notes and a chapter 7 review notes, which go a little bit deeper, and your links to your chapter 5 and chapter 7 practice quizzes. Take those as many times as you'd like. Again, our start times for our block day check-ins: period 3 is at 10:05, period 5 is at 12:15, period 7 is at 1:45. On Thursday, period 8 is at 1:45 as well. Check Canvas for those links. And then Friday, we will go back over that at 2 p.m. Obviously, when we are done with all this, I upload to YouTube and we go from there. I do have some meetings scheduled with folks the remainder of this week. So if you had requested a one-on-one meeting in your survey, please make sure that you're checking your email. That also being said, stop sharing here. I sent out a survey link. It's posted on the calendar for Friday. Please take a minute to answer those responses. Again, that should only take you just a few minutes. In regards of checking your email, I got an update from College Board. Literally, you don't need to do a single thing. They will send you your entry ticket and all the things that you need to do. We'll talk more about that. I have a webinar on the 28th that talks more about the software itself. But check the email associated with your College Board account, or log into the College Board account or College Board itself, because I got a list. Let's see here. I got a list that says the people who have already responded that they are taking the AP exam. I think I have, so I probably have maybe, I know Emma's on here. So Emma, you responded, you're taking the test. Rebecca Brown, you responded. Rachel, you did. But if you have not responded to the survey that says, that you are going to take the test, it just marks you as unknown. They will send you the entry ticket through email, regardless of whether you do anything or not. And all of that will go over after the 28th, but prior to the 11th. Okay. Any questions, concerns, comments for the good of the order before we wrap up our time? Chapter 5, the presidency. Chapter 7, the bureaucracy. There are so many resources on Canvas. Go back through those, guys. Review them. Look at Fed 70. You can use Brutus 1, Fed 51, and Fed 70. Am I lagging, Rebecca? Okay. You can use those. You can use those devices. That wasn't lag. That was just me thinking. You can use those documents, but again, go back, review Fed 70, answer the 2 prompts on your block day. Check in with me in the first 15 or 20 minutes of your time. And then on Friday, we're going to go through and review those questions. Anything for me before we kind of wrap things up for me? Okay. So for those of you who I have meetings with scheduled the rest of the day, we can kind of check in there. One of the questions on the survey this week is, would you like to schedule a one-on-one? So if that's something you'd like to do, let me know in the survey, and we'll start scheduling sometime starting next week. Otherwise, guys, check for the video on YouTube. If you have any questions, let me know. And I'm keeping to 30 minutes right under the dot. So there we go, guys. Good for us. All right. All right, AP Gov, miss your faces. I'll see you guys on tomorrow, Thursday, and for sure on Friday. Have a great day, guys.